last-minute news. A video has been infiltrated all over communication systems. Apparently, people from 2050 have created a virtual time machine which they have used to send a message from the future. Here is the first public release.
Good afternoon. Believe it or not, we are reaching you from 33 years ahead, from 2050. It's been a while since scientists invented time travel, but we could only recently get a permission to communicate across different points in the fourth dimension. This message holds a crucial importance for the people of 2070. We want to inform you about some critical changes that our world has witnessed since this exact moment that you will be watching this.
The purpose of this communication will be explained to you at the end of this video. We are representatives of the Global Ministry of Economy. Gemma, Gulje, Francesca,
hello,
our artificial intelligence, and myself will be accompanying you in this journey. Let's begin.
Between 2017 and 2050, many things changed in the economic world. As you can see from this graph, in 2050, the top world countries in terms of nominal GDP switch impactfully. China, India, and Indonesia are up the rankings now. India had a 5% average in real growth over the years. Italy lost its place, while other European powers and the US moved down as shown. In PPP rankings, so purchasing power parity, we can notice some switches in the rankings, as here, for example, India has a second place, beating the US. Anyways, the US, China, and India's economies in 2050 are each richer than the next 5 put together. Their rise has been positive, as with China and India in the top, issues as climate change, international security, and global economic governance were emphasized more. Asia in 2050 now covers over half of the world's economic growth after successfully increasing over the past few years, as you can see from the graph. In fact, its economy will account for 53% of global GDP. In 2014, we saw already a PPP increase by the, at the time, E7 countries compared to the G7 ones. And at the time, G7 still had 80% more of total GDP than E7 countries. But now in 2050, E7 GDP is twice as high in PPP and more than 50% in MER, as shown in the graph. India, as mentioned before, grew increasingly and caught up on both the US and China, as shown in the graph. The global population growth, in average, has decreased, but the global growth of what in 2017 were emerging countries has been possible thanks to population growth. A deeper explanation on labor force will be given later. This is why all E7 countries are now the driving force of the economy, as shown in these graphs that explain how they grew over the past years at an average rate of 2.1%, surpassing G7 countries in terms of both PPP and MER. Hence, as shown in the graph, all the emerging countries actually grew faster and now have more economic power than at the time developed countries. But in terms of income per capita, the all developed countries are still higher in the ranks. As shown in the graph, in PPP terms, E7 countries' GDP per capita growth is still below G7 ones.
Talking about the labor force. In the last 33 years, the world stopped producing an increase in workers. The average growth rate of the labor force decreased drastically, up to 0.3%, and it's still decreasing at an alarming rate. As you people know, in 2017, it was 1.7%. The most important thing to point out is that even though the workers dry up, the general population continues to grow. This situation is important and dangerous, as you might also be fearing. It's the working population that creates value, contributes tax dollars, and earns income that can be spent taking care of those not working, such as the elderly and the young. Many countries in Africa, Middle East, and Asia grew their labor forces dramatically, while developed nations have shrunk. The labor forces of Angola, Nigeria, and Kenya tripled since the time you'll be watching this, while the labor forces of Algeria, Egypt, and Iran doubled. Higher birth rates rates supported a healthy supply of workers. Some of these economies also benefited from increased participation rates, as more women enter the labor force, and in some countries, retirement ages are raised in order to increase the labor supply and support growth. Policies pursuing to increase participation rates, however, weren't able to boost growth significantly. Countries with favorable demographics had an advantage in terms of sustaining higher levels of growth. The contribution to growth from changes to the labor force for these economies have been positive and represented a larger driver of growth than capital and total factor productivity. Most of Europe and East Asia saw labor force declines, representing a severe drag on growth. Japan saw the greatest decline of over 1/4, while China and South Korea also experienced an 18% contraction in their labor forces. Within Europe, Greece, Portugal and Germany saw their available labor forces decline by over 1/5. As a group, emerging European economies, with a few exceptions including Turkey, experienced persistent declines in their available labor forces, ranging between 20 and 30%. The drop in their labor forces of these economies acted as a drag on growth.
As you have just seen, labor has been one of the main drivers for economic growth in the countries that you saw called BRICS. This is mainly due to demographic reasons, as all of these countries had higher birth rates than the developed countries, which supported a healthy supply of workers. Here is a production function that will lead us to sustainable growth, where Y is output in real GDP, A is a measure of productivity, F are the factors affecting A, K is capital, and H is labor time years of education. Countries like China or India benefited from the second part of the function, so capital, labor, and education. However, these factors are limited, and not focusing on the productivity factors has led them to leave the middle income trap. Of course, labor force has had a great influence in growth, more than capital or total factor productivity, but countries do not have a limitless workforce pool. Furthermore, as the economy develops, salaries increase, which is not sustainable in the long run because of productivity reasons. The middle income trap occurs essentially when a country's growth stagnates and ceases to grow beyond a point.
And how do you create productivity to multiply the effect of labor and capital and create growth?
Today, many of the top 10 economies such as China or Brazil have extractive institutions. Extractive institutions are controlled by a minority and elites that do their best to exploit the economy for their own benefit. On the other hand, inclusive institutions are those that allow and encourage participation by the great mass of people in economic activities that make the best use of their talents and skills.
In 2050, those countries that you call emerging economies surpassed some of the traditional leading economies, the old G7, in terms of absolute GDP, but they are still ranking poorly in terms of GDP per capita. We saw China, India or Indonesia performing so well until 2020, but they failed to escape from the middle income trap. There are many factors that increase productivity and lead to sustainable growth. Economic stability, social progress and cohesion, communications technology, environmental sustainability. Among these, the most important driver of productivity in the 21st century are political, legal and regulatory institutions. Economists like Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson, who wrote Why Nations Fall, already advised you in the early 2000s of the importance of inclusive social and political institutions for sustainable economic growth. Exclusive institutions have contributed to these average income differences over the last 250 years, and therefore it will take more than 33 years to close this gap. So, how to turn exclusive into inclusive institutions? These are a series of recommendations from the Global Ministry of Economy. First of all, to escape from the middle income trap, it is necessary to reduce corruption and build credible and trustworthy institutions. Secondly, promote institutional stability and authority. A fair and efficient tax regime can provide the funds necessary to support key social developments and provide a clear, stable regime within which to do business. We also recommend to improve the ease of doing business and stimulate technological progress and other forms of innovation through the protection of intellectual property rights. Countries should promote also trust in society. High levels of trust can boost social cohesion and have more general benefits in facilitating economic transactions of all kinds. Finally, an effective environmental regulation can promote sustainable long-term growth, since reducing externalities in 2017 will improve your prospects for 2050.